Hey everybody, I am Dan Krutka. I'm Assistant Professor of Social Studies Education at the University of North Texas, and I'm here to talk about something you probably haven't heard about in the last 2 or 3 seconds.
Coronavirus! Coronavirus!
Coronavirus. Yeah, I know, it seems like it's all people can talk about now. It really consumes our lives, and oftentimes we keep searching out news for it online, on social media, because we want to have control over the situation, and people go and hoard groceries and buy groceries because it gives them a sense of control over something that really feels overwhelming. But we're going to talk about today about how you can teach a social studies lesson about that. So whether you're sitting at home with your kids trying to figure out how you could study something they're already curious about, or whether you're doing remote learning, or whether you're just trying to figure it out yourself, I hope this video will be useful for you. So let's first talk about the purpose of social studies, because a lot of people's school experiences really don't prepare them to understand social studies well. Social studies is about preparing students and helping them grow as democratic citizens. It's not about memorizing facts about history. It's not about memorizing geography, economics, or political science. It's about taking the knowledge you have and turning it into wisdom, right? Being able to use that information to be a person who can make good in your community, who can make a better world. And so that's what we're trying to do in social studies. So when we try to think about the social studies of coronavirus, we want to use those lenses of those different disciplines: history, social studies, economics, geography, and on and on. There's a lot of other social science disciplines, but those are the ones that are most often taught in school. And we want to use those lenses to try to help us gain a more informed perspective, but also figure out what we can do as community members to address social problems. So in this video, I'm going to be using kind of an inquiry approach to the coronavirus, understanding that it's not, again, just about memorizing facts about it, but putting a bunch of different information together. Inquiry has been a prominent mode of teaching in social studies, particularly since about 2013, when the C3 framework for social studies state standards was released. And really that framework focuses on how to ask important questions and then figure out what we should do about those questions. And so that's what we're going to kind of walk through. So one of the first steps in that model is setting the stage. And so one of the first things I encourage teachers to do when I'm talking to my teacher candidates is to build on prior knowledge. And in this case, a lot of people are just hearing a lot of stuff. If you've got real young kids, they may have heard people talking about coronavirus, but even older kids too in high school have probably just heard people talking about it. And so I like to ask people what they know about it, but also how are they feeling about it. And so that's where I would start. I know when I was just over spring break visiting some family in California, my nephew, I asked him what he learned at school, and he said he learned about germs this week. And so he was 5 years old and they'd been learning about germs, and he told me it was to prevent the virus. So they'd already been talking about it at their school about how they can do that. And just thinking about your interactions with kids, that you're real sensitive to their feelings and how they're going to deal with it. With him, we actually had to go in public at one point, and so we ended up playing a game where we said we weren't going to touch anything with our hands. And we even kind of made it fun because I said touching your hands counts as touching your hands. And he was super diligent at making sure I didn't touch anything too. And so it became a way for us to be able to ensure that we didn't touch anything. So think about the ways you can kind of reposition this for kids and think about it, especially if they're younger. So that's my first piece of advice, is to really check in, see what they already know about it. They may already be coming with prior knowledge. They may be coming with misinformation, and you want to use that as an opportunity to ask questions that will help them move towards correcting any misinformation. So the next thing I want to think about is the skills and knowledge that they're going to develop from a lesson on coronavirus. And since a lot of what we find is online, you're going to need to have some kind of media literacy model or approach to looking at things online. And I'll give you just a couple examples that you can use. You can either give these to students to learn depending on their age, or you can use them to help ask questions about it. One is the Civic Online Reasoning Model from the Stanford History Education Group. They have a great site that you can go to and look at their model, and they really ask 3 primary questions that will help you think through whether sources you're finding online are quality sources or whether they're not. The SIFT model is another model by Mike Caulfield that I really like, and it's meant for helping to make kind of quick decisions about what to do online. It's not as detailed as some of these other models, because a lot of the stuff we just see it come through our Twitter feeds or our Instagram feeds or whatever it is on Facebook, and we don't want to do a lot of work. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And so before you send students online to do research or just to help them think about what they're learning, I would make sure to talk to them about media literacy and think about how they're going to make sure that they're finding accurate information and they're rejecting inaccurate information. And they don't even have to reject it if they're online. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just ignore stuff, because otherwise you actually amplify things when you give it attention. So that's one thing to think about in your lessons. But now let's talk about the pedagogy of what you could do. So here's the question I maybe would ask if I was designing a lesson. My compelling question. The compelling question is meant to be something that doesn't have a clear answer that we want to investigate. So the question I want to ask is, who is responsible for keeping us safe during a pandemic? I think that allows for a lot of different opportunities of thinking about where responsibility lies. And there's not clear answers because it obviously relies on multiple levels. But students, in answering that question later, may emphasize what they think are the most important places that we should hold responsible for making sure that we're safe during a pandemic. And so we'll kind of talk through that a little bit. So that's the big question. That's the question we're going to end at the end. But that's like, if you think of that as our unit question, is the best way to think of it. The next thing I would think of is a supporting question that gives us a little bit more narrow of a focus that we can then jump into and explore. So my first supporting question I would ask is something along the lines of, how do different organizations prepare for a pandemic? So that'll allow them to really do some civics or political science work where they start to understand, what is the CDC, what is the WHO, and then what is our federal, state, municipal governments? What do they do to help keep us safe in the event that some kind of virus breaks out and spreads among the population? And so that would be something that you could explore those different agencies and look at it. So usually in the IDM, the inquiry design model blueprint that a lot of teachers use to plan these inquiries, you would have specific sources there, and oftentimes you're finding primary sources or other things. I love to send students online to websites and places like that. So you might just send them to different sites and actually have them go find the sites too, is another option. But you just have to give them some preparation about how do you find quality sites online so that you can do media literacy that way too. A second supporting question that I would ask would probably have to do with the content that I was trying to teach. And so there's a variety of options depending on what you're teaching. For history, there's a lot of options. The history of disease is really interesting, and it's often not taught in schools, although I think it's really relevant. You can go all the way back to the Battle of Thermopylae, or to the bubonic plague or Black Death, to the 1918 influenza that really affected the United States. And you could even cover more recent viruses like MERS and SARS and H1N1, which is sometimes referred to as swine flu. And you could think about how you could understand those. To me, the Spanish flu or the 1918 influenza is the most relevant one. And there's some really good resources on that. I recommend Kenneth Davis's book, which I've got up here. We had him on my Visions of Education podcast if you're interested in listening to that. But PBS also has a great 50-minute documentary called 1918 Influenza with a bunch of great resources and teaching resources and timelines. And so you can really get in and investigate that. Now, you might need to think about what the age of the learner is. I would say this is for primarily older students to do that. But if you're not teaching older students, you might think about looking at those sources, and so you could learn about it more, and then maybe thinking about using some pictures. With younger kids, I would maybe use pictures that help them understand some of the signage that was in society, or pictures of people wearing masks in society, and that would help them talk about things that are relevant today. And so you could show people wearing masks in 1918 in the streets, and then wearing them in 2020 in the streets, and you can ask students what they notice are similar and different between those situations. And that could be a way to really investigate a bit of the history. You could also do geography and look at the spread of COVID-19 or coronavirus and understand why different countries have had different results. The 5 themes of geography are a helpful way to kind of investigate that. And so if you want to look at the 5 themes of geography, they help you think about places and how geography is really a very social field. It's often thought of as terrain and mountains and things, but it's really about also how humans impact the world and movement and things like that. And so, and the way we adapt the environment, and maybe also like, the ways that we've changed the environment has also led to things like this being more likely to happen. Some people have argued the ecological devastation has led to more of these viruses bringing humans and animals into closer contact in ways that can could start such viruses. So there's a lot of maps online right now, and so what I would do is find credible sites, and maybe you could explore some of those 5 themes through the maps. If you want to do some economics lessons, I mean, there's again going to be economists with graphs and other things coming out, and economic projections and modeling. But then also thinking about, what are we trying to project with economics? Are we just concerned about GDP or income, or do we care about different kinds of costs, the social costs of losing people you love, the social costs on society? And so we might think about, what are different economic models for looking at this? And then a third supporting question I would go to is to ask students, what can citizens do during a pandemic? And I think what they could do is review sites like the CDC for information, and see what they're able to find. Although you should always even read those sites critically. Recently, Zainab Tufekci had a great article in the New York Times that pointed out that the recommendations that people shouldn't wear masks because it can be difficult to fit it on your face, which can cause infecting. She pointed out that that was really bad messaging, because in the countries that have had a lot of success addressing coronavirus, actually mask wearing has been a very important part of that. And right now we have a supply shortage of masks, so those should go to healthcare professionals. But as that supply goes up, we probably are all going to want to be wearing masks to keep this down in the next year. So it's probably going to become normal soon that a lot of us are wearing masks. So it's something that you could also look at those 1918 photographs and help students start to think about, that we might be wearing masks soon, and why. And then the last thing I would do is take action, right? Identify what citizens can do, make personal commitments of things you can do, and then help spread the word. So I would maybe have students, when they're communicating their conclusions, I would have them maybe make a public service announcement that they could share with family and friends. You could maybe post on social media sites if you're comfortable with that, or they could share with other students in their class. But then you want to start doing something. You want to take that action and maybe focus on the most vulnerable populations and how we protect them through things like social distancing, hand washing, and staying at home is some of the biggest things that are recommended. And so thinking about what we can do for those groups that are also less likely to have healthcare access. And I always want to make sure I ask my students questions about how this problem doesn't affect everyone the same, because people with different means have different access to different resources. And so that's an important social studies thing. So I hope this video helped you think through the social studies of coronavirus and how you could explore an issue and do inquiry work and research online using good media literacy perspectives as you go along. But to help students grow as democratic citizens, this is a great time to ask what it means to be a citizen of this country, this nation, and this world. And so I hope you can do that with your children or your students. Thanks for watching.
Coronavirus! Coronavirus!